好，各位与会者、贵宾，下午好。那接下来是我们的第3场的这个专题演讲的时间哈。那接下来我们就把这个主持交给林秋斌教授。
大家下午好哈。我是清华大学林秋斌哈。那这个场次会由我来主持哈。那因为跟 Chee Kit Looi 已经认识了快20年了哈。那我们大概之前有跟他合作过一个计划，也大概合作了快10年，所以跟他还蛮熟的。那我想我们今天很高兴能够邀请到 Dr. Looi 哈来为我们做一个演讲。那各位知道现在因为疫情蛮严重的关系哈，那实际上这个 Dr. Looi 也是我们清华大学的那个尹书田讲座教授哈。那本来我们想要邀请他今年可以来台湾，大概待个1个月2个月哈，但是也都没有办法来哈。那所以我们大概之前的跟 Dr. Looi 的一些合作都是用线上的方式。那我们希望明年哈他能够真的来台湾哈，因为我想跟早上的那个 Ogata 一样啊 ，Ogata 刚刚早上说他来过台湾几次？25次哈。那我想 Dr. Looi 应该也不下这个数字哈，就是也常常来台湾哈，更多哈。也许等一下 Dr. Looi 自己讲他来过台湾几次，他自己也记不起来哈。OK， 那我想这个，因为我们这个20年来哈一直在推动这个数位学习，那这2年因为 COVID-19 的关系，所以整个数位化非常的快哈。那其实有一点快过头了哈，就是很多可能过去不了解数位学习的这些学校的老师哈，也被迫要去使用这个东西哈。那早上这个 Ogata 有讲到日本的一些状况哈，那待会那个 Dr. Looi 会讲一些亚洲的状况哈，就日本也会讲一些，那主要当然是以新加坡的一些状况为主。那刚刚还没开始之前，我们闲聊了一下哈，那个已经有2例到新加坡去了新的病毒哈，所以大家都很紧张哈。那所以这个还好了，我们透过视讯应该不会有任何的这个问题了，不会透过视讯传染。OK， 对，好，那我想我们就把那个时间交给 Dr. Looi 哈。那因为这个Dr. Looi 比较习惯用英文演讲哈，所以等一下会用英文演讲，但是他听得懂中文，所以如果等一下有问题的，也可以用中文来提问。OK， 好，那 Dr. Looi。
Yeah, thank you, Chee Kit, for the introduction. So let me share my screen. So thank you, Fu Yin and Chee Kit, for inviting me to do this talk at your conference. So the conference theme is post-COVID-19 situation. So this is the title of my talk, Needs-Driven Innovation, what COVID-19 tells us about digital transformation in learning. So I'm from the National Institute of Education and also from the Center for Research and Development in Learning at Nanyang Technological University. So I continue the discussion. I understand that Professor Hiroaki Ogata has talked about data and evidence-informed education and learning for a post-COVID era. So Professor Ogata said he has been to Taiwan for 25 times. So I lost count of how many times I've been to Taiwan, maybe also about 20 to 30 times. And the last time was in December 2 years ago when I came to Kenting for the ICCE conference. So I've not traveled since then. Hopefully I can come to Taiwan next year. So greetings from Singapore, city-state in Southeast Asia. And also some pictures from our university. So hopefully we can travel and you can come to Singapore. So this is the outline of my talk. I will talk about digital transformation and how COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformation. And I talk about some of the effects due to the COVID-19 disruptions. So what are the effects on learning? And I'll share some what are the new understanding about learning. Some of you may already know this, but it's good to reinforce this new understanding about learning. Then I'll share a little bit about how universities in Asia are coping. So just share some points about how different universities are coping. And then we rise above and discuss what is ripe for disruption, and we come back to the basics. What do we know about the design of online learning? So this is the evidence-based approach that Professor Ogata talked about, and then a summary and looking ahead. So before COVID-19, in education, we have been trying to digitize education. We've been trying to bring about digital transformation to education, but somehow it's been very resistant, unlike other sectors of the economy like manufacturing, logistics. So so education is generally quite resistant. The way we teach and learn quite unchanged over the years. But looking back, digital transformation can have different sources. So it could be research-driven kind of digital transformation. So many of us are professors and researchers, and we try to do research in educational technology to try to bring about some transformation. And then could have commercially driven products and services. So by the industry, the company. And then we have a technology-driven kind of sources of a digital transformation, AI, VR, AR, mixed reality, MR. And then we have innovation-driven kind of sources of digital transformation, like MOOCs, some about 10 years ago. And then now, in the past 2 years, we have a needs-driven kind of transformation. So, for example, the COVID-19, the virus, bring about lockdowns and require online and blended learning. So we are very much in a needs-driven age. We have to cope, and it's driven by the lockdowns due to the COVID-19. So there's a phrase used in the United States. It's called emergency remote teaching. So this is teaching in response to the needs of due to the disruptions. So there's a scrambling of teaching and learning to resume despite the disruptions. So you have needs-driven, and then you have emergency remote teaching and learning. So the question is, does this lead to quality online learning? So some people make a distinction between emergency remote teaching, which is coping with the current emergency and try to get instructors to teach online, versus the innovation-driven, the more thoughtful. Sorry, okay. So, and a more thoughtful kind of innovation-driven requires careful planning and design. So some people make a distinction between emergency remote teaching and this kind of more careful planning and design, more thoughtful kind of design. And the thinking is this innovation-driven, careful planning and design will lead to more sustained quality online learning. Okay, so for example, in this citation, this literature, it makes a difference between distance education, which is planned activity grounded in theoretical and practical knowledge, whereas emergency remote education, ERE, is more like a survival mode of education, using all the resources available. So some folks make a distinction between these two. Okay, so which lead us to think that actually two views about the response. First is we're all reacting to the crisis, and then after a reaction, we might go back to the normal. So therefore, you have the emergency remote teaching to cope with the current restrictions. Okay, so that's one view. The second view is we see this as a great opportunity to relook at and transform education. So opportunity, it becomes more prominent than the crisis. So it's more an opportunity, looking at it as an opportunity to relook at and transform education. So these include a lot of efforts by educators and students around the world to try to make the most out of the disruptions by innovating in online teaching, innovating in having students resume their learning, home-based learning. So two views. One is what you're doing now is just try an emergency response, and things haven't really changed much, and we hope it might go back to normal. The other view is it's a great opportunity to relook at and transform education. Okay, so this is related. It's a question of are instructors ready or are teachers ready for these precarious times? Are we ready to take on all this online learning, distance education? So here is a quote from some authors. The key lesson is to embrace e-learning technology before disaster strikes. And here you say that instructors are forced to practice online learning. So if they are forced in an emergency, then they will have to scramble with and start learning the different modes, start learning the digital mode, the blended learning mode. So if they are prepared, then things will be much different. They may be spending more time to create more content and meaningful learning activities. So key question is, are instructors prepare for the blended learning, the online learning, the distance education? Okay, so and there's a recent Horizon report, EduCourse Horizon report. It says that the COVID-19 pandemic has transformed the higher education landscape. So the landscape in the universities. So it remains to be seen whether these changes are good and will persist in the future. But it's not hard to imagine that higher education may never be the same in some important ways, good or bad. So it's definitely some changes, some transformation. But here it says we're not sure yet whether it is good or bad, but it has changed and it's definitely not the same, never be the same again in important ways. Okay, so what new understanding has developed over these 2 years? So there are, I think, there are papers published on this. There are special issue of journals that look at the learning during these COVID-19 disruptions. So here I kind of summarize some main points from. I think we understand that the digital divide is sharpened during the COVID-19. So I'll talk a little bit about this later. So faculty have to teach differently, so we all know that. And hybrid education becomes the norm. So combination of face-to-face and online learning. And issues that we kind of take for granted before, like having students to do their own self-regulation, the emotional well-being, their resilience. So all this becomes important. So all these issues become more important. So these are probably not new. I think you have heard about this, even from research. Okay, so the digital divide. You used to think that online education, distance education, can solve the equity issue because it can provide quality learning to everyone. But is this really the case? So So is this really the case? In China, they published these reports. The Beijing Normal University worked with UNESCO, for example. They published a number of handbooks, useful guides to help cope with the disruptions. So how to facilitate flexible learning. So they provide a number of useful guides to help teachers, educators, parents, students to cope with the online learning. So in China, they have this phrase, right? Disrupted class, undisrupted learning. So class is disrupted, but learning is not disrupted. So I think it's a very meaningful phase. Okay, so it doesn't really solve the equity issue. So last year in Singapore, we have this newspaper report it says, pandemic shows inequality begins at home for students' learning. So because the conditions for students to do online learning at home, what we call home-based learning, are very different. So these different conditions provide about, these different conditions result in some inequality. So for example, the space for home-based learning, the space, the laptops, the internet access. So conditions are different. When they work in a small working space together with other brothers and sisters and their parents who are also working at home, it could be quite challenging for those whose conditions are not right. So there's a feeling that the digital divide is sharpened during this online learning, home-based learning. Yeah. So, and what about the consequences of students doing their consequences for students learning when education in school is disrupted? So there are also some research that shows some of these outcomes. So the suspension of in-class instruction in schools has led to concerns about consequences for students' learning. So there are some reports out there that mention this. So I'd like to show you one or two of these reports. So this is from UNESCO. So it's say 2/3 of academic year has been lost on average due to the COVID-19 full or partial disclosures. So I think this was 2020, last year. So you look at it, it's quite alarming, right? 2/3 of academic year. And this is data from the United States. So they say, what have we learned about unfinished learning? So this is from the McKinsey.com report. Okay, so in the beginning of the 2020, just 40% of K-12 students were in districts that offer in-person instruction. Okay, so they collect data from 1.6 million elementary school, primary school students from more than 40 states. So, I just extract some statements from the report. So it shows that our analysis shows that the impact of the pandemic on K-12 student learning was significant, leaving students on average 5 months behind in mathematics and 4 months behind in reading by the end of the school year. So, some data on what they call unfinished learning. When students have some of their school education disrupted, they don't have in-person instruction in the schools. So this is from the United States. So, and there's also another report, you might have heard of it, is from the Netherlands. Netherlands, the lockdown was actually quite short, about 8 weeks. And Netherlands is actually quite well equipped with, for example, good school funding, a high rate of broadband access. So they collect data from primary school performance, about 350,000. And they compare progress during this COVID-19 school lockdown period to the same period in previous years. So they compare the period when they have these school closures and compare with previous years. So this obtained from this report. Yeah, you see it in the bottom. Okay, so the learning loss is uneven. So the result shows learning loss about 3 percentile points or 0.08 standard deviations. So the effect is about 1/5 of a school year, the same period that schools remain closed. Okay, so nice. Okay. So yeah, so there's some loss due to the school closures in the Netherlands, and the effects reflects the cumulative impact of knowledge learned. So it's cumulatively rather than inferences in the short term on the day of testing. So this is what they show. So yeah, and it's uneven. So I think this result is not so alarming, but the more alarming result is uneven. So it affects those students from less educated homes more. So losses up to 60%, larger from students with less educated homes. So it confirmed the worries that the pandemic has a different effect, a toll on children and families. So that so these findings suggest that some students make little or no progress while learning from home. And in Netherlands, students from less educated homes suffer more. So it suggests that even larger in countries with weaker infrastructure or longer school closures. Okay, so some data from the effects of learning loss from the US and from Netherlands. So, and also reports of during this period, right, a lot of time spent on the screen, right? So there's for students, for teachers, for everyone. So there's this so reports of digital burnout and fatigue, widespread reports, and symptoms associated with digital fatigue include stress, fatigue, not being sensitive anymore to the environment, no loss of interest, physical and mental problems. And then burnout is multitasking, always looking at the screen, hyper-focusing, adapting to online timing, dissonance between the real world and the virtual world. So a separation between the real world and the screen-based world where you indulge in your learning. So some of the effects, has been reported in some of these applications, quite serious. Yeah. So therefore, the issue of well-being is important. So there's some research also looking at students' well-being, how affected they are. So now we know that even more that the health is essential to education. So health, physical as well as emotional. So part of it is part of it of being away from school and being away from teachers, from counselors, having to look after yourself, look after your own learning routines, and therefore rely on how well you are regulating your own learning. So different conditions, so it can lead to emotional health issues, and at the same time allow students to build to put students with good conditions to make the best out of it, to be resilient. If the technology doesn't work, what do they do? If they do not get help on the lessons, what do they do? So give them opportunities to try to practice getting help, looking for their own resources and building resilience. So this graphic shows that so it's not just the Bloom taxonomy for the cognitive levels of learning. It's also the Maslow needs hierarchies are also important. So now let me move on to something quite different. Having said all these things, I kind of do a kind of anecdotal research on how some universities in Asia are coping with the classroom closures. So these are just some anecdotal information. They're not complete, but hopefully can stimulate some thoughts, some thinking about how you're coping with this digital transformation. So first, Singapore. Singapore is where I come from. So 6 universities in Singapore. So they are trying to ramp up. They're trying to speed up their digital efforts in the face of this global pandemic. So we know that digital learning is not new, but the pandemic has made online learning more important than it was before. Okay, so I think probably also true for you in Taiwan. Yeah, it's not new, but it makes it even more important. And the universities and as well as schools in Singapore, I guess, K-12 schools are pushed to come up with thinking about the future how to prepare students for the future, and the future will be more digitized jobs you'll encounter in the future. So it's a way of relooking at education, looking at the jobs. A lot of jobs are lost in this COVID-19 situation. So a lot of new jobs have appeared, especially the jobs that require ICT, digitized jobs. So so we're looking at preparing students for future jobs, so preparing students for the future. So it's a move towards the digital jobs, for example, the AI jobs, the cybersecurity, all the jobs that will become even more important when a lot of transactions are digital, and therefore there's emphasis on lifelong learning. So emphasis on continuing to learn even after graduation. So that's some thing. I just want to mention lifelong learning. There's this concept that the university curriculum, what you do, what you teach students for a degree, it's not just 4 years. So it's actually 60 years, according to Chris Didi from Harvard University. So he wrote a book. He asked me to buy a copy of this book. So I did that. The book is a 60-year curriculum, new models for lifelong learning and the digital economy. So think about it, it's not 4 years, it's 60 years. It's a lifelong learning process. You're going to prepare for a lifelong series of careers and take on many professional and social roles to engage in post-career activities. And so therefore, the qualities, the dispositions that we want to train our students in are a lot of the soft skills, how to be flexible, resilient, confident, appreciate diversity, how to be open to new ideas and initiative. So I just aside to mention there's this concept that you have to think beyond 4 years, think of a 60-year curriculum. It's a nice metaphor. So back to universities in Singapore. So we have to practice social distancing. So for lectures where you have more than 50 students, it has to be delivered online. So for this, most of these 2 years, okay. So for sessions that require to be conducted face-to-face, for example, hands-on experimentation, seminars, and lab sessions, it can still be conducted online, but they're restricted to a smaller group of people, maybe 50 people each time, and must be held in a large enough avenue to ensure safe distancing. Okay, so that's what you're practicing now. Small groups, you can still meet face-to-face, but there must be safe distancing. And individual faculties have the flexibility to decide how they wish to conduct. Okay, so social distancing in the university. So looking ahead, in my university, for example, planning ahead. So if new courses are proposed, they need to have 20% online. So emphasizing the online components of the courses. And the courses are modularized, broken down into smaller modules which bear credits. So you can take these modules more conveniently. These modules which are credit bearing, and then hybrid classes. So hybrid classes means students meeting face to face in class. For example, 30 students in class and 30 students online. And looking ahead, looking at assessment of learning is a push towards having more continuous assessment, 100%. So you try to minimize people putting students in the exam hall, putting a lot of students in the big exam hall to do examinations. So push towards more continuous assessment. So avoid exams where you're large gathering. So sharing some aspects of how my universities in Singapore are coping. Okay, so Japan, I got some information talking to some professors. Maybe Professor Okata has shared much more with you. But anyway, I'll just cover this. So Japan. So they have a, very much like Singapore. So still face-to-face for practical work, field work, and online meetings, Zoom meetings, lecture, interaction, group work is online. And then on-demand video for students, one way. On-demand task-based, teacher gives students some materials or tasks to read, and students do the task and submit back. Okay, and then hybrid sessions where students can choose whether they come to class or take course at home via Zoom. So they have a choice. Okay, so that's how Japanese universities are coping. They're quite positive with high flexibility mode in which students can choose whether they can attend classes online or on campus. And faculty and students have become more adaptable to online teaching and learning. So that's Japanese universities. So I come across some Facebook pages. It's in Japanese. This is an English translation. So university instructors have come together, about 21,000 of them, to form self-help group to help themselves what they do under the impact of the COVID disruptions. I think they also have sharing among themselves on, for example, this interesting topic on it's a theory that online lessons deepen isolation, correct? So a lot of sharing within the community of instructors in Japan. So no one expects to go back to the old normal in Japan, and they come to the realization that many of the teaching sessions are okay with Zoom, and with the advantages of the affordances of technology, they can retrieve the lecture anytime. And I think they suggest that maybe in Japan, for example, meeting face-to-face online is probably regulated by law. So they suggest that if you move towards hybrid or high flexibility perspective, maybe you need to also revise the law. Yeah, so sometimes the law restrict the online meetings, right? Because it's regulated by law. So I'm not sure about Taiwan. So that's Japan. South Korea. So in South Korea, in early days, they also tried online learning. So as you know, South Korea is like the Netherlands. They are very good technology infrastructure. So initially, I think 2020, students are not very satisfied with the online learning. So they want to take a leave of absence, and they cite the low quality of classes, and they are not happy because they pay tuition fees, and they're not happy with the online learning, the quality of classes. So that's 2020. I think they have improved since then, and the more general point is South Korea experiences demonstrate that long-time systemic change is required, backed up with policy. Yeah. Okay, so in South Korea, I think that the discussion on some of the ways to approach to deliver the best online teaching and learning experiences. So, for example, universities sharing resources, sharing professors with each other, which is enabled through online means, or with foreign universities, and also through the development of MOOCs. So I think as they explore these options on how to provide quality online education in South Korea. So how about China? Classes during the COVID-19 lockdowns in China. So China, of course, is a big scale kind of disruption. So I got some data from a report from Tsinghua University. So close to 1 million teachers from 1,500 universities in China. So they have been teaching so many courses online, close to 1 million, serving so many students, 1.18 million students. So the scale is quite alarming, right? The level of disruption, therefore, is also quite very high. So there's some information on the big scale of online learning. Yeah, so you can see so many courses offered online in the spring 2020, involving so many teachers and students, so many courses. I think in Tsinghua University, they prepare the faculty, right, to do the online teaching for within 2 weeks. So, the split group set up to ensure quality online courses. So it's really trying to, trying to move up the scale in rapid response to the university closures. Yeah. So I come across this very nice talk by this Tsinghua University professor. He talked about you look at the data, survey data on online education in Tsinghua during the COVID-19. So he surveyed the professors, the faculty. He also surveyed the students on how they feel about the online education the instructors are giving, or the online education the students are receiving. So, from the survey, these are some of the responses. So, challenges of online teaching, right? Online teaching. So the first round relates more to the infrastructure. So unstable network and technical low efficiency of teacher-student interaction, and failure to assess academic performance. Second, so first round is maybe the first semester, and then following up semester. Following semester is more about the challenges to online teaching. So insufficient discussion among students, failure to assess students in real time, and students cannot maintain concentration in class. So that's from the teacher's perspective. You poll the instructors, and this is what they get. And from the students, you can have a quick glance at all this. So they also fear that the study efficiency is not high at home. You cannot stay focused when taking online courses, and insufficient discussion with classmates. So these are some of the feedback from students. So the notion of a hybrid class, where you teach students in class, and some of the students are actually online. So I got this article, and this article, this is photo. So in a classroom in a secondary school in China, so it's a teacher teaching a hybrid class. So the online students were also attending the same class. So and they call it online merge offline OMO learning. So they use of these terms, online merge offline learning. So so that's an example of hybrid class. So based on the survey from the Tsinghua University professor, right, you understand that online teaching faces these challenges: the interaction between students, inadequate peer learning, inefficient home-based learning, resulting in a slight decline in higher level learning outcomes. So all this we know, but so it comes a realization that it's important to have self-regulated learning for students. Self-regulated learning is a big term. It really means whether students have the ability to monitor and regulate their own learning. So it's come to realization that self-regulated is very important in preparing students for a post-COVID era. It needs to be cultivated. So they are not totally reliant on the teachers in school or the resources provided in the school. So they have some ways of regulating their own learning. So having shared what those universities are doing, so here are some reflections. So for Japan and Korea, they have a hybrid learning, right? High flexibility mode. Does it lead to better quality education and better student engagement and satisfaction? Okay, so high flexibility mode. So these are probably opportunities for research, and how to prepare faculty and students to be ready for online learning. So are instructors ready, right? Just now I showed a slide on that. So how to scale and sustain this. and how to help students develop self-regulated learning to bring about better learning outcomes. So, John Hattie, Australian professor, so he talked about it as self-regulated learning as when students see themselves as their own teachers. So when students start to take over ownership and agency and start to see themselves as guiding their own teaching, helping each other, see themselves as their own teaching. So that's a way of explaining self-regulated learning, whether they can take over some of their learning and see themselves as their own teachers. So that's what John Hattie say. And how to design continuous assessment of learning. So so by teachers, so continuous assessment learning in the online mode, and how to design good online learning. So that's where my discipline comes in, the learning sciences perspective, and probably some science for learning perspectives. Yeah, so opportunities for looking at some of these aspects of preparing students for the post-COVID era. Yeah. So looking at this digital transformation, some points about what is ready for disruption. So this is taken. So one thing is clear, right? The traditional lecture model, where students gather in a theater to listen to a professor. So this is ripe for disruption. I think this setup has not changed over the past 200 years. The big lecture hall and a large group of students. So this is this is really ripe for changes in the post-COVID era. And the second point is traditional assessment. As I said just now, you put students in a big exam hall and ask them to answer an examination script for 2 hours, 3 hours. So it's also ripe for disruption. So and Cotis has a nice way of putting it. Regardless of whether you give them an exam or not, they are still largely going on to contribute and change the world. So actually, the exam is not immaterial. It's not material to them. They still have to go on and face the world and work in the world, change the world. So if exam is about if assessment is about providing feedback, then you can think of continuous assessment. You don't have to think about one big summative assessment at the end of the course. So here's a point for thought. Yeah, change the traditional assessment, which is exams at small tests. Okay, so the movement to online learning has brought about a number of advantages, as we note. So if lectures pre-recorded, students can view them at their own preferred time and location. So for me, I also do hybrid classes, and I do it through Zoom. So I make the Zoom recording available for all students to view. Yeah, so I guess it provides some benefits for students to be able to access the recording of the lectures. And learning with lecture recording allows to pause for notes or rewind to listen to a concept again. Okay, so that's the first point. Second point is lecture halls and large classrooms may be empty, but we have the realization that face-to-face interaction is actually still an important part of higher ed learning. So face-to-face interaction is still important. The social interaction, the social interaction that we meet face-to-face. So there's still a value to traditional education methods. And the in-depth integration of technology will be a gradual approach, not a revolutionary approach. So get the best out of online learning, the first point. And the second point is there's still a lot of value to face-to-face interaction, and how to retain that is a crucial part of hybrid learning in the post-COVID era. So I think nobody has all this. I think we are all in the quest as researchers to find out what works best and to do evaluation. Okay, so Talking about designing of learning experiences, designing a good online learning experience. I just want to mention there are some very good resources out there. So, for example, Mike Sharpers has published a book about, I think, 2 or 3 years ago on practical pedagogy, where he collected 40 new ways to teach and learn. So these are like 40 pedagogies that has been studied, and there's evidence-based, there's data, as Professor Okata said, use the phrase to show that some of these methods at work. Yeah, so these methods can also be adapted to online learning. So I just want to mention a few of them. Yeah, so online. So one of them is space learning. So space learning is if you space out learning, right? Let's say in space out learning, you have a 20-minute chunk of learning, and then you have a period of rest, and then continue learning. So that through research, Ebbinghaus has shown that it's better in information recall than learning that's spaced together, very close to each other. So so the notion of space learning is supported by evidence from the cognitive science and neuroscience literature. So it's a pilot study in 50 schools, and a combination of 10-minute and 24-hour space. So different ways of spacing up. So you have 10 minutes break where you can do something different. For example, you can do some physical activity, some yoga, while trying to learn some intense topic. They come back to it, consolidate the learning, and then have another break, and then continue the learning. So this space learning, supported by evidence-based. So yeah, it shows that cramming, if you put the learning together, cram in a single session, it actually decreases the brain activity. And the science of learning shows that repeated information loses its novelty. So it creates illusion of knowledge because you keep looking at the same information again and again. It creates illusion of knowledge and overconfidence. Okay, so so the better approach is to learn a little bit each day, space out the learning and study sessions to allow for better memory recall. Okay, so maybe a lot of us as teachers, instructors, or professors already know this, but now there's evidence that shows that it actually works, explain how it works, and encourages us to practice it even more. So space learning. Another one is so there are 4 of these pedagogies. I just mentioned 2 or 3. The one that impresses me, for example, is teach back. So have 2 learners, where one teach the other what he or she knows about the subject. So I have 2 students, right? 2 students, one student teach the other, and they role switch. So and both progress towards a more meaningful shared understanding of topic. So so you apply teaching in an online learning mode. So instead of the instructor talking all the time over some PPT slides, you break the class into groups of 2 learners and get the learners to practice teach back. Yeah, okay. So there are ways to think about it, and you can apply the method to online learning, right? As I mentioned, and even put in some AI, for example, concept of teachable agents. Yeah, so I think these are productive ways to look forward to how we can make use of these pedagogies. So another one is from Informed by the Science of Learning. So this is from a colleague. He wrote this book, and he mentioned that the neuroscience teaches us that the brain is designed to interact with the world and with others. It's not just for storing information. Okay, so therefore, instructors, teachers should incorporate movements, cross and find in the learning. So there should be some concrete approach and practicals. So it should not be some peripheral, but should be central to learning. Okay, so this is a challenge for online learning, because online learning tends to be very conceptual, right? Because you look at the screen and then you think about it. So if you look at this science of learning, it says that you have to interact with the world, with others. You have to manipulate some objects to make it concrete. You need to work on something practical. So it's a challenge for online learning that's purely conceptual. So we have to think of online learning where it can resort to social interaction, resort to students working with their own artifact, object, or practical work. So because that is what the brain is designed to interact with. It's not just for storing information, not just for remembering and storing information, but to experience it concretely and to interact socially with others. Yeah, so these are some pedagogies which are informed by the learning sciences and science of learning and can be used, adapted to an online way if you are going to move learning online. Okay, so another one I thought is interesting to mention. Sleep is actually very good. Sleep. So a lot of students before the day of exam, right? They work very hard in the night, but actually sleep is important. So the brain imaging shows that during sleep, the neural circuits that we use during the day gets reactivated. So in a way, it strengthens memory and consolidate memory. So to take it further, some scientists report making discoveries during sleep. I think you don't have to believe that, but the point is, we can think of findings from the neuroscience, learning sciences, which are helpful for us to think of good pedagogies. Yeah. So now back to the hybrid class, right? So hybrid class, you talk to a class with live students, and then you also have students who log on online. Okay, so actually, I think many of you are professors or teachers. You have already done this hybrid class. So it's a bit like a live talk show host, right? You know what's a live talk show host? So you have a live audience and you interact with them. And then there are also a lot of TV viewers. And then you have also to entertain them. So it's quite challenging, right, for a teacher to interact with the live audience at the same time with the virtual audience. Okay, so I thought it's interesting to look at the pedagogy of teaching in this hybrid class. Okay, because I myself did this for the past few semesters. I wonder if there are good practices to help us to make the best out of this hybrid class. So for example, should we be seamless between the live students and online? Seamless meaning you try to merge them, think of them as the same group, the same audience. So you don't distinguish between the live and the online students. You make it seamless. Or is it better to know that they are different and have slightly different interactions with them? So I think these are questions to explore. Interesting. A lot of you have experiences doing this, and I think more wisdom can come as we develop good practices of teaching in a hybrid class. Yeah. So of course, it depends on the discipline, the domain, the subject. So, but there might be some common knowledge that we can gain by studying these pedagogies. Yeah. Okay. So I'm coming to the end of talk. I just want to mention a few more useful points. It's good to take note. So this is from my colleague Wang Longxiang. He encourages a minimalist approach when it comes to using educational technology. So because many of us as researchers, we tend to work on very advanced technology and we try to push the boundary of the technology or pedagogy. Okay. But they're often very advanced because they require very advanced infrastructure, very good internet connectivity, and the teacher and students are ready for online learning. Okay, but in general, this is very difficult to achieve in the average school. In a school out there, in some big countries, right, in the rural areas, it's not the case, right? They don't have these conditions. So therefore, many of the research solutions developed in the literature by, especially using advanced technologies, they cannot apply them. So therefore, we need to bridge the gap and have a minimalist approach. Minimalist approach work on pedagogies that use very minimal technologies. So the point is maybe less is more in terms of impact on practice. Less is more in terms of being able to reach out to the many places in the world. So therefore, it's important to work on the instructors' adaptivity. So get them to be adaptable. When they read about something from a professor, a research article, they can adapt it to their own conditions. So they can apply it to their classroom in the rural area. They don't have all those conditions. So if they're adaptable, they can improvise and they can overcome the resource constraints. So yeah, improvise and get them to be adaptable. So maybe teachers can help them to, teachers can be adaptive and they can be creative to read about something, some nice technology or pedagogy and adapt it to their own classroom. Okay, so come to the end of the talk. Just want to summarize. Okay, so a point that I often mention is a lot of what we know about education is understood from what's happening in schools. So a lot of what we learn about education is understood from institutions. So and schools are places where it's very organized, very institutionalized. They have fixed curriculum, teachers to provide guidance. They have great structures. So they have primary 1, primary 2, sec 1, sec 2, and it's organized into classes, and then you need testing at all the critical levels. So schools are good. I mean, they serve a role, but schools may become an end itself. Being admitted to good school is a main criteria of quality education. So I know, these are some of the aspects of school, but learning is not just what happens in schools. So learning is also what happens a lot outside of schools. So the COVID-19 disruptions have told us that a lot of things happening outside of schools that actually affect the students' learning, that affects the students' well-being. So I think we start to pay a lot more attention to what happened outside of schools. Yeah, so that's the point here. So we start to understand a lot about how students learn in school on their own, or maybe with support from the parents. How do students learn in the school, learn by themselves? Do they become resilient? Do they become their own teachers? Do they become able to self-regulate? So so we need a pragmatic approach, and that COVID-19 has accelerated all these changes. And then we need blended learning, and faculty have coped, teachers have coped, drawing on their own experiences. So some are become very creative. They learn from their peers, and they start to develop new teaching methods using new tools on the internet. And actually, this provide a lot of large-scale experimentation, providing the evidence-based approaches, and useful for the learning analytics that Professor Okata probably talked about. And you need to pay attention for what each mode is good for the face-to-face, the social interactions, teacher guiding, and scaffolding. That's the and then for the online mode, help students to develop their self-regulated learning, explore their own interests, their peer learning, and tap on external resources. For the policymaker, how to make online learning, make it pervasive and scalable, and take on a minimalist approach. Yeah, as I mentioned, and the part that I didn't talk about, we also need a lot of industry collaboration. So a lot of ample opportunities to do research that can make a big impact. Now that we have these experiences of the years of how students learn at home on their own, so we need self-regulation, resilience, well-being. Yeah. So I guess you can look towards collaboration in raising quality education. Just some statements. COVID-19 bring the best and the worst time to education. Look at it as an opportunity to reshape education with more radical ideas and technologies. And it could be could be we could provide conditions for doing a lot of educational experiments to study online learning, study self-regulation, equity, well-being, emotional health. Yeah. So I think that's it lah. I thought a lot of things. Hopefully, some of these things stick with you and get you to think about some of the issues. So it's an opportunity to think about education systems for the long term. Yeah. So I'll stop the sharing. Yeah.
谢谢 Dr. Lu 的演讲哈。因为时间的关系哈，我们大概也没有太多时间可以问问题。不过我想，因为疫情的关系哈，大家不得不用 online learning 哈。那不过我想 online learning 也没办法取代这个 face to face 哈，不然我们不用那么努力跑来这里听演讲跟参加研讨会嘛哈。那我想这个实体的研讨会的好处就是等一下有 coffee break 哈，但是 Dr. Lu 就没有 coffee break 哈。那我们这边有便当哈，他得在家自己煮饭吃哈。所以这个是实体跟现场还是有它的一个不可取代性哈。那我想这个因为时间的关系，外面有 coffee break， 所以我们就先不要问问题哈。那如果有问题的可以留下来，因为我们还要跟 Dr. Lu 继续闲聊。那如果没有问题的，我们就可以出去外面享用这个 coffee break。OK， 谢谢 Dr. Lu 啊，谢谢。所以 Dr. Lu 你还不能离开哈，我们还要闲聊一下，还要拍合照。好，谢谢大家好，那我们这个场次都到这边，那各位可以到外面享用 coffee break， 那如果有问题的也可以留下来。